With a woman today who tells me she made an anonymous tip to DHS with concerns about the child's safety about 2 weeks before the child's death. So today I asked authorities about that as the mother and her boyfriend appeared here in court today.
In a world where innocence is often shattered by the cruel hands of fate, the story of Evangelina is a tragic reminder of the darkest corners of human nature. This 2-year-old angel, whose life was brutally cut short, suffered unimaginable torment at the hands of a monster. Her autopsy revealed a chilling tale of broken bones, bite marks, and unimaginable pain. The very thought of her tiny voice, crying out in the darkness, is a haunting reminder of the fear, confusion, and agony she endured in her final days. The psychological impact on Evangelina's brothers, who witnessed her torment, is a devastating aspect of this case. The trauma they endured, the helplessness they felt, and the scars that will likely never fully heal are all a testament to the long-listing effects of such brutality. This case is a disturbing example of the evil that exists in the world, and it raises important questions about the safety and well-being of our most vulnerable citizens. As we explore this tragic case, we're left with a haunting question. What kind of evil could inflict such brutality on an innocent soul? The fact that a 2-year-old child had a broken pelvis is a disturbing indication of the violence she suffered. The sheer cruelty and brutality of it all are almost too much to comprehend. And yet, we must confront the darkness head-on in order to understand the magnitude of this tragedy. The story of Evangelina is a complex and troubling one, and it will be examined in the following account. So let's go! Welcome to Detective Jeffrey Crime Station! A huge thank you to our amazing subscribers and viewers for joining us on this journey into the world of true crime. We're honored that you've chosen to spend your time with us, and we're grateful for your trust and support. If you're new here, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell to stay up to date on our latest captivating stories. Your engagement means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more thrilling and thought-provoking content with you. Evangelina Wing's story is not just one of physical abuse. It's a profound exploration of lost innocence, fractured trust, and the emotional scars that linger long after the physical wounds have healed. At the heart of this tragedy is a child who should have been surrounded by love and safety, but was instead subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone line, calm yet laced with urgency, a lifeline in the darkness of a desperate moment. "What's your emergency?" The response came from a woman, her voice trembling, fractured by panic. There's a child not breathing," she stammered, the words barely escaping her throat. The call set off a chain reaction. Sirens wailed, lights flashed, and first responders raced through the quiet streets of Seaside, Oregon, a picturesque coastal town known for its tranquil beaches and tight-knit community. But the scene that awaited them was anything but serene. When they arrived at the small, unassuming apartment, they were met with an oppressive silence, broken only by the muffled weeping of a woman sitting hunched in the corner. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of something unspeakable. In a dimly lit bedroom, they found her 2-year-old Evangelina Wing, lying motionless on her side, her tiny body a canvas of unimaginable suffering. Bruises mottled her skin, dark and angry like shadows of the pain she had endured. Discoloration ringed her neck, a silent testament to hands that had gripped too tightly. Dried blood crusted her ears, a grim detail that spoke of internal trauma. She was already in full rigor mortis, her small, fragile form frozen in time, a haunting snapshot of her final moments. But it wasn't just her lifeless state that left the medics shaken to their core. It was the story her injuries told. A story so horrifying, so cruel, that it defied comprehension. Bite marks marred her skin, some fresh, others healed into scars, evidence of repeated violence. Burns, some still raw, others scabbed over, traced patterns of deliberate cruelty across her body. Broken bones, some old and improperly healed, others fresh and jagged, spoke of a prolonged campaign of torment. This was not the result of a single tragic accident. This was the culmination of months of calculated brutality, inflicted on a child who could not fight back, who could not escape, who could not even cry out for help. The question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. How could someone do this to a child? Evangelina had lived in this apartment with her mother, Dorothy Wing, and her two young brothers. Dorothy, a single mother, had been struggling to make ends meet, working long hours to provide for her family. To the outside world, she seemed like any other parent battling the weight of life's challenges. But just weeks before Evangelina's death, a new figure had entered their lives. Randy Roden, a man with a troubled past and a penchant for violence. Dorothy met him through a mutual acquaintance, and within days she invited him to move in. To the neighbors, it might have seemed like a practical arrangement, a single mother needing help, a man willing to step in. But behind closed doors, a nightmare was unfolding. Randy quickly assumed the role of caregiver while Dorothy worked long hours, but the facade of normalcy began to crack almost immediately. The children, once lively and playful, grew quiet and withdrawn. Neighbors would later recall hearing strange noises, thuds, cries, and the occasional sharp reprimand, but they dismissed it as the sounds of a stressed household. No one could have imagined the horrors taking place inside. When Evangelina's body was discovered, Dorothy claimed her daughter had fallen off the toilet a few days earlier, an accident that had seemingly spiraled into tragedy. But as investigators began to piece together the evidence, a far darker picture emerged. This was no accident. Evangelina's death was the final act in a months-long campaign of abuse, a systematic breakdown of humanity that had turned a once-loving home into a house of horrors. Dorothy Wing, the mother, presents a complex emotional figure. Was she a victim herself, manipulated and controlled by Randy Roden, or was she complicit in the abuse? Her decision to invite a man with a troubled past into their home suggests desperation, perhaps loneliness, but also a catastrophic lapse in judgment. The guilt she must have carried, whether from her inability to protect her children or from her direct involvement, would have been a crushing weight. Her suppressed weeping when responders arrived hints at a woman torn apart by regret, fear, and grief. For the first responders and investigators, the emotional toll was immense. Medics are trained to handle trauma, but the sight of Evangelina's broken body, a child who should have been running, laughing, and playing, would have been seared into their memories. The bite marks, burns, and broken bones were not just injuries. They were a testament to the evil humans are capable of inflicting on the innocent. Many of these professionals would later struggle with the haunting question, could we have saved her if we'd known sooner? The investigation into Evangelina's death was a painstaking process, requiring both forensic expertise and emotional resilience. When responders arrived at the scene, the initial assumption was that her death might have been a tragic accident, as Dorothy had claimed. But the evidence told a different story. Forensic experts meticulously documented Evangelina's injuries. The bite marks were analyzed for dental impressions, the burns were categorized by their severity and age, and the broken bones were examined to determine whether they were the result of a single incident or repeated abuse. The discoloration around her neck suggested strangulation, while the dried blood in her ears pointed to internal trauma. possibly from blunt force to the head. Each injury was a piece of the puzzle, revealing a pattern of sustained abuse. Seaside police first turned their attention to Evangelina's brothers after discovering their sister's lifeless body. The boys were immediately taken to the hospital where doctors examined their injuries, bruises, burns, and broken bones that hinted at a prolonged and systematic pattern of abuse. Though the full extent of their wounds was not publicly detailed, prosecutors later identified them as victims, stating that Randy Roden had intentionally harmed them, just as he had Evangelina. The investigation took a harrowing turn as specialists trained in child trauma interviewed the boys, carefully coaxing out the terrifying memories they had buried. Their voices trembled as they recounted the horrors they had endured, being beaten with objects, burned and locked in closets for hours on end. They spoke of Evangelina's suffering in heartbreaking detail, their words painting a devastating picture of a household ruled by violence and fear. Their testimonies helped investigators piece together the final days of Evangelina's life, revealing the unbearable cruelty she had suffered at the hands of Roden. As detectives dug deeper, Roden's past revealed itself to be just as dark as the crimes he was now accused of. A convicted felon from Georgia, his record was littered with violent offenses, coercion, kidnapping, assault, and strangulation. In 2012, he had been indicted on 52 counts of domestic violence and sex abuse involving another woman. Yet, despite this staggering number of charges, he had somehow managed to escape lasting consequences. He had drifted into Dorothy Wing's life at some point in the autumn, moving into the home she shared with her children. Prosecutors argued that Dorothy had knowingly placed her daughter in the hands of a man she understood to be dangerous, a decision that ultimately cost Evangelina her life. The central question surrounding her involvement remained. Was she merely a terrified and passive bystander, too afraid to stand up to Roden, or had she been an active participant in the horrific abuse that unfolded inside their home? Further scrutiny was placed on Dorothy Wing's troubled past, particularly her relationship with her estranged husband, Randy Wing. In June, she had filed for a restraining order against him, claiming that he had returned home drunk, accused her of infidelity, and then strangled her to prevent her from screaming. But despite the court order, she later allowed him to move back in, a fact that came to light when Seaside police responded to a domestic disturbance at her home on August 17th. According to the police report, Dorothy admitted that she knew she was violating the restraining order by letting Robin stay, but she had done so anyway. Randy Wing's legal troubles continued into December, when a judge sentenced him to prison for assault and a probation violation, with an earliest release date set for September 2017. As the investigation pressed forward, the weight of the evidence became undeniable. The court documents painted a chilling reality, one in which Evangelina's death had not been a single tragic incident, but the inevitable result of a long cycle of abuse and neglect. Prosecutors charged Roden with aggravated murder, accusing him of not only killing Evangelina, but doing so with intentional maiming and torture. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. Dorothy Wing, though not charged with the actual murder, was held responsible for her role in the suffering her children endured. On Friday, the judge ordered both her and Roden to remain behind bars, their futures now in the hands of the justice system. Meanwhile, Evangelina's brothers, though physically healing, remained in state custody, their lives forever altered by the nightmare they had survived. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel as a means of encouraging us. Thank you, as you do so. As the details of the case came to light, the community of Seaside was left reeling. How could this have happened in their town, in their midst? How could no one have seen the signs, heard the cries, intervened before it was too late? Seaside, Oregon was a community unaccustomed to such horrors. Known for its quiet beaches and close-knit neighborhoods, the town was shaken to its core by Evangelina's death. The case forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about their own complacency and the fragility of innocence. Neighbors who had heard strange noises or noticed the children's sudden withdrawal were plagued by guilt. Could I have done more? They asked themselves. Should I have called someone? The tragedy exposed the cracks in the community's vigilance, highlighting the importance of speaking up when something seems amiss. Vigils were held for Evangelina, her tiny face immortalized in photographs that circulated through the town. Candles flickered in the night, their light a symbol of hope and remembrance. But beneath the grief was a simmering anger, a demand for accountability. How could this have happened? Who was to blame? The community's trust in its institutions was shaken as questions arose about whether more could have been done to protect the Wing children. The case also sparked a broader conversation about child abuse and the need for greater awareness. Local organizations held workshops on recognizing the signs of abuse, and schools implemented programs to educate children about their rights and how to seek help. Evangelina's death became a catalyst for change, but the cost of that change was unbearably high. The trial that followed would go down as one of the most harrowing in Clatsop County's history. Randy Roden was charged with multiple counts of child abuse and murder, his past laid bare for all to see, a history of violence, of manipulation, of a man who had slipped through the cracks of the system time and time again. Dorothy Wing, too, faced charges, her role in the tragedy scrutinized under the harsh light of the courtroom. Was she a victim herself, trapped in a cycle of abuse and fear? Or was she complicit, her inaction enabling the horrors that unfolded in her home? Seaside had never seen anything like it. The quiet coastal town found itself thrust into the national spotlight as reporters, spectators, and legal experts crowded into the small courthouse. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Every seat was filled, many by townspeople who had known little of Evangelina or her family, their faces tight with grief and disbelief. One by one, witnesses took the stand, their voices trembling as they recounted the horrors she had endured. The prosecution laid out its case in painful detail, each new revelation sending ripples of shock through the room. Some spectators turned away, unable to bear the graphic testimony, while others sat frozen, their hands clenched in their laps. Seaside had always been a place where people looked out for each other, where tragedy was something that happened somewhere else. But now, as the trial unfolded, the town was forced to face an unbearable truth, one that would haunt them long after the courtroom doors closed. Prosecutors painted a damning picture of Roden, portraying him as a predator who had systematically terrorized the Wing children. Forensic experts, medical professionals, and child psychologists took the stand, their testimony leaving little room for doubt about the extent of the abuse. Dorothy's defense team argued that she was a victim herself, manipulated and controlled by Roden, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Her failure to protect her children, even if driven by fear, was seen as a betrayal of her most basic duty as a mother. Officers arrested 24-year-old Dorothy Wing in Seaside, charging her with murder by abuse, manslaughter, and criminal mistreatment. Her live-in boyfriend, 26-year-old Randy Roden, had already been taken into custody on an aggravated murder charge. The pair appeared in court via video on Friday, where they pleaded not guilty. The courtroom, already shaken by the horrific details of the case, watched as the judge ordered both to remain in jail without bail. Evangelina Wing, the little girl at the center of the case, had been just 2 years old when she died. She would have turned 3 in January. In 2016, a jury found Roden guilty of multiple charges, including murder by abuse, felony murder, manslaughter, assault, and criminal mistreatment. He was sentenced to nearly 40 years in prison, his conviction serving as a grim reminder of the horrors that had unfolded inside the Seaside apartment. Prosecutors described the case as one of the worst instances of child abuse in Clatsop County history. Wing, who had struck a deal with the state to testify against Roden, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and criminal mistreatment in exchange for lesser charges. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But for many, the verdicts brought little solace. No amount of justice could undo what had been done to Evangelina and her brothers. The legal system had done its job, but it could not heal the wounds left behind. The case raised difficult questions about the adequacy of child protection laws and the need for systemic reform. How many other children were suffering in silence? How many more tragedies would it take to spur real change? The case left the community shattered, searching for answers that would never come. Evangelina's story became a rallying cry for change, a call to action for stronger child protection laws, better support for single parents, and a more vigilant community. But for those who had known her, who had seen her smile or heard her laugh, the pain would never fully fade. Evangelina Wing was more than a victim. She was a symbol of innocence lost, of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors, and of the urgent need to protect those who cannot protect themselves. During Roden's trial, the prosecution introduced expert testimony from an odontologist, a forensic specialist in teeth and bite marks. The expert claimed that some of Evangelina's injuries were not random wounds, but intentional bite marks inflicted by an adult. This testimony became a critical piece of evidence for the state, helping to establish that the injuries were not accidental or caused by illness, but were instead deliberate acts of cruelty. Roden's defense, however, argued that Evangelina had suffered from MRSA, a dangerous antibiotic-resistant infection. They claimed the infection had led to sepsis and organ failure, and what had been identified as bite marks were actually wounds caused by the disease. Years later, in a stunning reversal, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned Roden's murder convictions. The court ruled that the prosecution had failed to present a solid scientific foundation for the bite mark evidence, and that the testimony should not have been admitted at trial. While the state conceded that allowing the testimony had been an error, the Oregon Department of Justice argued that it was a minor mistake unlikely to have influenced the jury's verdicts. However, the appeals court disagreed. It determined that while the flawed testimony had little impact on Roden's convictions for assault and criminal mistreatment, it had significantly undermined his defense in the homicide charges. Roden's attorney had placed much of the blame on Dorothy Wing, arguing that she had been responsible for the assault and mistreatment of the children. He had also argued that the prosecution had failed to prove Evangelina's death was the direct result of Roden's actions. According to the appeals court ruling, the central issue for the jury had been determining what actually caused Evangelina's death. If the jury had believed that she had died from infection sepsis rather than inflicted injuries, they might have had reasonable doubt about whether Roden had acted with extreme indifference to human life. Without the bite mark testimony, the defense believed there was a possibility that the jury could have convicted him on lesser charges instead. The ruling sent shockwaves through the prosecution. Clatsop County District Attorney Ron Brown, who had led the case against Roden, was stunned when he received the news. He later admitted that when he heard the decision during a meeting, it felt like a gut punch, leaving him unable to focus on anything else. Brown strongly disagreed with the Department of Justice's concession that admitting the bite mark evidence had been a legal error. He insisted that the state had never used the evidence to match the marks directly to Roden, only to confirm that an adult, not a child, had inflicted them. However, the appeals court determined that this distinction did not change the fact that the testimony had directly undermined the defense's argument. With the homicide convictions overturned, the case was sent back to Clatsop County Circuit Court for a potential retrial. Brown, determined to fight the decision, announced that he planned to ask the Oregon Attorney General to appeal the ruling to the state Supreme Court. For now, the future of Roden's case remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. The battle for justice in Evangelina Wing's death was far from over. The case of Evangelina Wing became a stark reminder of the fragility of childhood, of the vulnerability of those who cannot speak for themselves. It was a story not just of individual evil, but of systemic failure. Of neighbors who turned a blind eye, of a system that failed to protect the most vulnerable, of a mother who, whether out of fear, manipulation, or complicity, allowed her children to suffer unimaginable horrors. Her story is a reminder that evil does not always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it whispers, it manipulates, it hides in plain sight, and sometimes it takes the life of a child, leaving behind a community forever changed, forever haunted by the question, how could we have let this happen? We hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. Because you did, subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to show your appreciation. Additionally, tap the notification bell to be kept abreast with our latest videos and ensure you don't miss out on any new content. This will keep you informed about our upcoming true crime stories and allow you to stay engaged with our community. Thank you once again. Your support means a lot to us.